President al-Assad tells Fox News that Syria never succumbed to threats but responded to Russian initiative out of conviction. President al-Assad stresses that Syria has supported the Geneva process from the start, but the US blocked it. A UN source says that any mention of the use of force has been omitted in the draft resolution about chemical weapons at the Security Council. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Hirado Krikorian from the News Center in Damascus. President Bashar al-Assad has stressed Syria's commitment to all the requirements of its decision to join the Chemical Weapons Prohibition Treaty and its acceptance to implement its contents in refraining from manufacturing, storing, using or distributing such weapons and getting rid of them in response to the Russian initiative and on the basis of Syrian convictions. In an interview with the American Fox News network held with His Excellency by former American Congressman Denis Kucinich and journalist Greg Balcott, President al-Assad said the Syrian leadership cares for the confidence given to it by the Syrian people and is specifically searching for such confidence. He affirmed that any diplomatic move to solve the crisis in Syria without realizing stability and disposing of the terrorists will be nothing but an illusion. Therefore, any diplomatic move should start with stopping the influx of terrorists and halting the logistic, financial and military support rendered to them, the President stressed. On Syria's agreement to this initiative, President al-Assad said, "We have not agreed to it now only, as we had presented 10 years ago in 2003, when Syria was a non-permanent member of the Security Council, a proposal to the UN in order to render the Middle East an area completely void of weapons of mass destruction." It was the USA which opposed this proposal at the time. Consequently, we do have the conviction to see the Middle East free of all kinds of weapons of mass destruction, because this area is extremely fluctuant and is constantly at the edge of chaos and wars. Therefore, it cannot be said that we have agreed only now, the President pointed out. Concerning the UN report on the chemical attack in Damascus suburbs last month, and on clear and persuasive evidence that the sarin nerve gas was used, President al-Assad said, "They have samples and they are supposed to be objective. We have received no official report. This is the information we have, and the information is different from the evidence. I do not disagree with the report. We have to wait until we get the evidence," the President stressed. A UN source has said that any reference to sanctions or the use of force against Syria has been wiped out from the draft resolution on chemical weapons in Syria. During the second meeting of the 5 member countries of the UN Security Council, the source pointed out that experts expect the draft resolution submitted by the USA, Britain and France to be voted upon, which means that the consultative meetings will continue until a formula is reached that is agreed upon by all parties. It is to be mentioned that the first meeting was held by the Chinese, British, Russian, American and French representatives in New York to discuss the aforementioned draft resolution. The Russian President's special envoy to the Middle East, Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov, has stressed that Russia would probably submit evidence to the UN Security Council today about the opposition's use of chemical weapons in Damascus, Ghouta. In a press conference, Bogdanov said, "The Russian side does not rule out paying future visits to Damascus to consult with the Syrian leadership over various issues pertaining to the crisis in Syria, focusing at the same time on the need to launch a process for a political solution to the crisis and to the humanitarian issues." Bogdanov did not rule out similar visits by representatives of the Syrian leadership to Moscow. Bogdanov added that contacts with representatives of the Syrian government and the opposition may take place on the sideline of the UN General Assembly's meetings. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov stressed that the proofs presented by Syria on chemical weapons used by the armed terrorist groups on August 21st in Damascus countryside are very important, clear and technical. At a press conference, Ryabkov pointed out that those proofs do not have any political purpose. Ryabkov asserted that any UN Security Council resolution on Syria must be limited on supporting the work of the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons based on the Russian-US agreement in Geneva. He described the Russian-Syrian relations as deep-rooted and promising, adding that the friendship relations between the two peoples are firm. In Damascus countryside, our armed forces destroyed terrorist dens and heavy weapons used by armed groups in Adra countryside, killing and wounding dozens of them. Ten citizens were killed and several others injured in two terrorist attacks near Rafi'in crossroad on Homs Misyaf and Akrad al-Dasniye al-Haysa roads. Terrorists detonated an explosive when a bus passed by on Homs Misyaf road, killing 9 citizens and injuring others. A missile shell slammed on another bus while it was on its way between Akrad al-Dasniye and al-Haysa villages, where the driver was killed and all other passengers were injured. Moreover, terrorists targeted houses in a Sa'an area, causing material damage. No casualties were reported. On the other hand, an army unit killed 7 terrorists and destroyed their weapons in Akrad al-Dasniye in Homs countryside. A terrorist den used for criminal plans was destroyed in Al-Farhaniya village in Talbisa area, killing or injuring all the terrorists inside. Meanwhile, army units foiled an attempt by terrorists to detonate a booby-trapped car, killing the suicide bomber who was driving the car in the village of Kifernan. In Deir ez-Zor, our armed forces clashed with an armed terrorist group in Al-Arfi, Al-Jbeila and Sina Fuad Street, killing and wounding dozens of them. The army also targeted terrorists in Al-Bukamal and Al-Mayadin, killing scores, including some of Al-Nusra terrorist leaders. Units of the armed forces carried out operations against terrorists in Aleppo provinces and destroyed cars coming from Turkey loaded with weapons and ammunition, killing and injuring scores of terrorists. The army units targeted terrorist gatherings in Khan al-Asal area and destroyed their weapons and ammunition, while other army units destroyed 3 rocket launch pads and mortar launchers in Al-Jdeide, Rasm al-Aboud and Queres, killing many terrorists. Army units destroyed cars loaded with weapons and ammunition to the north of Al-Jabbul Lake in the southeastern countryside of Aleppo and the villages of Al-Jandul, Al-Awayja to the north of Aleppo and Al-Naqarin in the eastern countryside of Aleppo, killing and injuring scores of terrorists. An army unit foiled a terrorist attempt to infiltrate safe areas in Al-Layramoun from Mahlajat al-Rasafi, while another army unit clashed with an armed terrorist group which attempted to attack Al-Kindi hospital. Iraqi troops have captured 35 terrorists, including the so-called Emir of the south of the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, Muhammad Ali Kahan, in Jarf al-Sakhr district in the governorate of Babil. Another force captured 14 terrorists and killed Ali Jassim Salman, nicknamed Ali Sawadi, the Emir of Al-Qaeda organization in Al-Mosul. In Tal Afar, near the Syrian borders, a security force was able to seize an anti-aircraft shell. Al Jazeera and Al Badia troops also arrested 5 smugglers north of Al Walid border point as they were trying to smuggle 4 trucks loaded with various materials for the armed terrorist gangs in Syria. Back to our local news with the participation of a Yemeni delegation representing cultural, political and party activities. The Syrian Teachers Association held a sit-in in front of the UN Commissariat in Damascus. The sit-in aims at sending a message to the world about the aggression against Syria and that the Syrian Arab Army is defending the country against foreign terrorists. Several cultural figures and media men took part in the sit-in, voicing support for Syria's efforts to combat terrorism. Now to latest business and market news, but after a short break, stay tuned. Initiative and on the basis of Syrian convictions. In an interview with the American Fox News network held with His Excellency by former American Congressman Denis Kucinich and journalist Greg Balcott, President al-Assad said the Syrian leadership cares for the confidence given to it by the Syrian people and is specifically searching for such confidence. He affirmed that any diplomatic move to solve the council President al-Assad stresses that Syria has supported the Geneva process from the start, but the US blocked it. A UN source says that any mention of the use of force has been omitted in the draft resolution about chemical weapons at the Security Council. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Irado Krikorian from the News Center in Damascus. President Bashar al-Assad has stressed Syria's commitment to all the requirements of its decision to join the Chemical Weapons Prohibition Treaty and its acceptance to implement its contents in refraining from manufacturing, storing, using or distributing such weapons and getting rid of them in response to the Russian initiative. President al-Assad tells Fox News that Syria never succumbed to threats but responded to Russian initiative out of conviction.